special.
Yeah, I started to really like handmade pottery. I don't know at what point. Long time ago though, and I would go thrift shopping and try to I mean, I was like every time I saw a thrift store, I would just see potential handmade pottery in there. Like I want to go and explore it. So it was like something I really got into, and I wanted to learn how to do it for a long time before I started taking classes to learn. And now I'm ruined for the stuff at the thrift store. I just want to make my own. So it's fun.
Oh
Craft.
man, that sounds nice. I would love to be able to do stuff like that.
Do you guys have any crafts that you do?
Well,
I'll show you something I used to do. It's really geeky.
I wonder what it is. Hi, James from Bahia. Nice to see you in the chat today. We're about to learn what Jennifer used to do.
I make little bookmarks.
oh, that's
Oh
fun.
my
Oh, those are
gosh,
really
that's
That's
cool.
really
cool.
cute. That's really cute.
Jennifer showed me her journal while she was here. She's got like a writing and poetry journal, and it is phenomenal. It's like all this mixed media. She uses lots of visuals, and it's
Oh, I love that.
very cool.
Scrapbooky
Yeah, it's
fluff.
just futzing about with paper. That's all. I just like pretty paper and I just arrange it.
It's awesome.
That's awesome. Yes.
Hi,
Very
Gamma
creative.
Yun and Cody R. How about you, Christine? Any crafts?
No crafts, but I'm learning to play golf. I just started a couple months ago.
That's
So,
cool.
yeah, it's very hard, challenging game, and you need a lot of patience for it. But it's been fun actually. So, we'll see how that goes.
I've been trying to
Winston
twist
Churchill said,
Benjamin's arm to learn
Oh,
golf and
really?
and take my boys. Like all of you guys,
Oh,
go start golfing.
yes.
There's
Yes.
what did Winston Churchill say, Aaron?
"Golf is the best way to spoil a good walk."
Totally.
Deborah, do you do any crafts or arts?
Knitting, but I haven't done any knitting projects in a while, but
Yeah.
be knitting.
Oh wow, were you part of the whole Knittergate thing? What did they call it? Did you hear
I
when that was
never, I
happening?
never, yes, I did hear about it, but I've always been an independent knitter. So
Not a very online knitter.
no, not a community type. I'm
Yeah.
a solo.
Yeah, that was pretty nuts. What happened with the online spaces for knitters?
Yeah.
Aaron, how about you? Are you a knitter or a golfer?
Um, no, I do target shooting and I'm trying to learn how to fish.
Oh.
I've done a little bit of painting, but I'm not very good at it. You can see like all of the
Are those
paintings on my
yours?
wall.
Wow.
No,
Oh,
those
wow.
are those are my wife's,
Oh,
and
she's
Oh,
good.
so
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
she's
She's really
really
good.
good. So she's she's often got like the color paints out. So I'm trying to learn to do that. Before we moved to Florida, I was going to try very hard to get into hunting and harvesting my own meat and so forth. But now that we're in Florida, I don't think that'll be happening.
Is it not a
Uh,
place for hunting?
Not,
Alligator.
it's not, you can, people do really hunt alligator and it's very good, but the deer population down here is not very good. They tend to be pretty scrawny, I guess. And so I'd have to go out of state to do it. And that's not really what I wasn't going to be that into it. I just wanted to sort of have more of a connection with my food. So I'm trying to learn to fish right now. So I throw my line in the water with some bait a lot. I wouldn't go so far as to call it fishing because I think you have to have a bite first in order to call it fishing. So I don't know. I'll call it lining or something like that.
Lining. That's funny.
Lining.
Well, that's cool. Well, it's nice to hear a little bit more about what you guys do for fun and for edification rather than just, culture war stuff. Deborah, before we launch into our discussion today, you want to introduce Solid Ground for anybody joining us who doesn't know?
Sure. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or authoritarian measures such as medical mandates in their workplace, university, children's schools, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups, in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join our peer support group for $10 a month, which you can find on Solid Ground Substack, or you can join our forum discussion on locals, Solid Ground Locals, for $5 a month. Please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy and/or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for the good comments here. Gamma Yun says he likes, or he or she, actually she, maybe there's a picture of a woman in the profile pic, likes your craft, Jennifer, and says they want to do
Aw.
crafts but never feel grounded enough to sit down and focus on it. Yeah.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah. James from Bahia, are you a craft beersmith? Is that what that is? Yeah, that's
Oh, how
cool. That's
cool.
pretty
That's
neat.
Oh,
really
that's
great.
awesome.
That's
Yeah.
a great craft to have.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
97 cents does fishing. That's cool. Oh, wait. 97 cents says in Florida, that is, not me. Okay. So, but just maybe a endorsement of fishing. Mrs. says, I make natural glitter from mica stone. That is really interesting.
Wow, that's
Yep.
cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Fandar Zelig says, when I was very young in the 80s, my grandmother created a scrapbook for me of greeting cards, toy catalog clippings, stickers, etc. Such a simple thing, but I've cherished it ever since.
Bet.
That's really cool.
What was better than, you guys remember that? It used to, in the pre-internet days, when you were making your Christmas list and so forth, you used to save like pictures of toys in the catalog, and it was so exciting. What a great idea for a scrapbook that his grandmother had.
That is really cool, yeah. 97 cents says, no, I make maple syrup.
Oh,
cool.
wow, that's even better.
Yeah,
I like
that's
it.
awesome. Well, so how about them chemtrails, y'all? Are you following the news about?
No.
Now I have
Yeah,
to
a little
Google
bit.
it.
The blocking the sun thing?
Yeah, the UK is now
Yeah.
openly admitting that they're experimenting with spraying particles into the atmosphere in order to dim the sun, which is something that, if anybody with eyes could see, has been going on for quite a while, but it's
Yes.
been so hard to talk about because if you mention it, people will say, oh no, those are just contrails. That's just ice crystals. That's not. And yet, there's all kinds of scientific literature on this exact thing, the spraying of aerosols. So now that it's not a conspiracy theory anymore, it's out in the open, and I've seen a lot of people talking about it on social media.
Wow. Jeez.
What do they call it? Geo something. Geo, is it
Engineering.
geoengineering? Geo.
Yeah.
Geoengineering. Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, I hear Florida is going to ban it. There's some U.S. states that are seeking to make it illegal.
Well, I live in Florida and nobody's asked me yet, but it seems like people down here are generally very cautious about people mucking about with. They want to approach these kinds of things very cautiously and slowly. So I could imagine that Florida would want to be banning it. Although I don't know how you would sort of uh, protect the sky over Florida if, say, I don't know, Georgia decided that they were going to do this.
Right.
Yeah, what does it mean for, I mean, it must drift for quite a ways, I would imagine. It can't be good. Florida, didn't they do the geoengineered or the art bioengineered mosquitoes there in order to fight, what was that disease that was going around? Zika virus. That's right.
Oh
It was-
yeah, the Zika virus.
And
I
so they
remember that.
released a bunch of Bill Gates mosquitoes to
Oh,
fight
they did
Zika.
that in the US?
Yeah, in Florida a few
Well,
years ago.
I haven't heard about that. What I can tell you is that in my neighborhood, which is sort of like a very old neighborhood, there's all these lush palm trees and wonderful growth that has grown up. It's, believe it or not, it's kind of shady, even though it's in Florida, because all of these tropical plants have grown up so large in my neighborhood, and so it's wonderful. But there's very few mosquitoes.
Mm.
So I can sit out on my um, on my little patio in front of my house in the evening without any bug repellent, and I see relatively few mosquitoes around. Maybe in the summer, I'll throw on some off or something. So Bill Gates might have something to do with that.
Mm,
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah,
but
student
I'm willing
student
to
of
mm.
throw my
rhythm.
tinfoil hat.
Student of rhythm says, "Can they bioengineer mosquitoes not to bite people?" If I recall, and I might get this wrong, so somebody check it and find out, but I think they engineered the mosquitoes to be infertile, and they released a bunch of them so that they would reduce the population. So they made it so that the mosquitoes existing would mate and then not be able to produce young. I think so. Check that if you guys are interested.
But isn't
90.
isn't the
Yeah.
other thing where they've done some of them, I think, with Bill Gates, and I don't think this is a conspiracy because I don't tend to, that they might have been using for vaccination. Like they might have been
Mm,
getting
Oh yeah.
these bugs to be able to vaccinate people, and talk about a consent issue
Yeah, they're trying to
with that.
make the vaccines that are self-replicating so that you can inject them into the population and they'll spread. You can put them in salad. They've experimented with putting vaccines in salad. So you're eating it and you're getting it. So this totally bypasses
God.
consent. Yeah.
yes.
Well, anytime you feel like you're a controlling person, just think about that and you'll realize you're not so friggin' controlling after all.
Well, I mean,
True.
in defense of the mosquito idea, could you imagine having to sign a consent document that a mosquito was carrying? It'd be darn near impossible. It'd be so small.
Hmm.
Nanotechnology for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so some people are saying yes about the sterile mosquito issue. Yeah. Student of Rhythm says, okay, we all hate mosquitoes, but they do feed bats. If you disrupt the food chains
Yeah.
so low down, worse
Well, yeah,
problems.
that
I
was
know,
going to
and
be
I
my
love
question.
bats. We can't hurt bats. They're too cute.
Oh, Gamma Yun says New Hampshire has a bill introduced to ban cloud seeding. Yeah, that's another word for that geoengineering.
Go closet.
And I think it was 97 cents wanted a source when I started talking about the bioengineering
Hmm.
or the
Oh, there's
geoengineering.
actually yeah, there's this little article. I'm actually looking at it on CNN. This controversial climate solution could be exactly what the planet needs, or it could be a colossal disaster. It was written in 2023, and it said there had been a plan for balloons filled with helium and a small amount of sulfur dioxide to float high up into the stratosphere, which would then cause them to burst and disperse their load of sun reflecting sulfur dioxide particles and cool the earth just a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it says.
Just,
So people are
it'll
actually trying
just
to
be
do
a
this.
little.
Yeah,
And I think it was in the
What could
UK, like in the
possibly
last
go
week
wrong?
or two, where they really talked about it quite
mm-hmm.
openly. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
where I saw it, but it was real like news sources.
It is real news sources.
Yeah.
97 cents. You can find multiple sources if you want to just Google it. Lots of mainstream
Mainstream.
articles on this. The UK is out
Yeah.
with it. So it's going to go that thing. The meme, they're doing the meme where it's like, you try to say, I think they're doing this. And everybody says, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not happening. And then somebody comes out with it and they go, well, that's happening. And it's a good thing. So, um,
Yes.
that's kind of the 97 says they're not actually doing that. Yeah, check it out. Check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it says it's called solo geoengineering, also known as solar radiation management, and it's an attempt to bring down the planet's temperature by reflecting sunlight away or allowing more heat to escape into space.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, if somebody has a good link for 97 cents, you can post it in the chat. On another topic, Aaron, you sent us some stuff on accreditation and executive orders. Is that right? What is
Yeah,
this? And I
from
thought that Deborah brought this up right before we went live, but I was thinking this for the people who never hear us discuss Trump, maybe it would be a good idea to talk about executive orders a little bit, just to make people
uh,
happy.
and I haven't had time to dive into it, but I did look at the White House page, and to confirm that this was indeed the case, because I didn't see it being covered in mainstream media. I usually every day I look at the Wall Street Journal and I look at Barry Weiss's The Free Press, and I haven't seen anything pertaining to this in any one of those sources. Um, but according to the White House website, there was an executive order about this, and for like just for people who are watching, they might be interested why people who are interested in therapy might be interested in the concept of accreditation in education. And essentially, right now, and I can speak specifically to counselor education, but I'm sure this is also true for K through 12 education. Um, what is actually taught is heavily influenced by the bodies that accredit uh, a program, okay, like a counseling program. The accreditation essentially says this is the standard for what must inform curriculi, what is taught in the classroom. And the accrediting body for counselor education is called KCREP, which is Counseling and Related Educational Programs. And the reason why this is such a big issue is because there are relatively few accrediting programs. So for counseling, there's technically two, but really there's just KCREP. And so KCREP has a what's the word when someone has sole influence over something? You might say they have a monopoly
Mm-hmm.
on counseling. And so, if KCREP can then be controlled by those with ideological interests, then it means that the interests of the person who are doing the controlling can easily be spread throughout a field. And the new K and the new standards for accrediting bodies come out every few years. And the new KCREP standards uh, uh, have items in them which essentially correspond to progressive doctrine. So there are issues about intersectionality. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion might be mentioned specifically in the new standards. Um, but the reason it's important that there's an executive order about this, and the reason that we need legislation about this, is because accrediting bodies have a huge influence on what's taught, especially in college classrooms. And so
Yep.
something needs to happen to
Yeah.
keep accreditation from being as influential as it is, or to make sure that accrediting bodies don't begin um, uh, to, to to be allowed to spread politics
Mm-hmm.
throughout the secondary higher education. So I'm not sure how well I explained that,
What
but
about just deregulating? Why would we not just deregulate? Why would we not just remove the licensure requirement?
I suppose that the danger is, if we were to take this as a thought experiment,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that someone might say, well, my approach to psychotherapy involves astrology. And I like to read people's palms, and I like to give people advice based on the alignment of the planets. And
Well,
the thought was the thought was that accrediting bodies would keep things like that from happening.
they're
Um,
not, though. I mean, if your approach to
right,
psychotherapy involves telling white people that they're terrible and black
right,
people that they're victims, I mean, you're doing something that's like less evidence based than astrology at this point.
right. Yeah,
I've actually thought astrology might. I know a really good astrologer, who is a fantastic person. Well, actually, I know two of them because Deborah Knox is into astrology. So, and the sorts of self insight that you can get through talking with someone who's just going to listen to you and help you interpret patterns in your life, if that's the I've thought before, if that is offered as a form of sort of therapy, why not? Let the market decide. Let people decide that's what they want.
That's true. I
And
mean, you can always tell your therapist, no, I don't want you to do my chart. I used to have a
Yeah.
therapist that did my chart. She was into oh, I'm forgetting the type, Vedic astrology, and I think, and so she was always consulting my chart and sharing things. But it was quite funny because one time I showed up over an hour late for an appointment, and she was generally very strict about if you missed an appointment charging you, but she didn't charge me because she said something like Mercury or Mars or something was in retrograde, so it wasn't my fault that I missed the appointment. So
I wanted to
I love
respond,
it.
Leslie. I'm sorry, Leslie, to your general thing of like why, because this accreditation EO covers all sorts of universities and programs. So it's not just like psychotherapy or counseling, even though it would cover that. And it does seem, as I think about it, or I zoom out, it's a bit of consumer protection, but it's also protection, especially at the undergraduate level, of people that are taking, say, student loans, not getting into programs. Because if you say, well, let the buyer beware, it's your problem if you screw up. Well, in the case where there's people taking out like government money to go to school, and then they go to a school that's lousy, it's crappy, they're never going to get to graduate, because the program is so bad that they don't learn anything. I see there is some interest in the government of wanting a program to be of some basic, and that's one of the things they want to make sure. I don't know how they're evaluating that these are high quality, high value programs, but they are looking at like, what are the graduation rates? How much debt? Is there a good return on investment for people going to these programs? So they also are proposing having more of a market for more accreditors. So I think that's the way they're bringing some free market into it. So they're not necessarily saying, let's just not have no accreditation, which is sort of like one way you're sort of thinking about it. It's like, and they want to promote innovation around how to come up with other accreditation systems. So they haven't eliminated accreditation entirely, I think, because some of the reasons I mentioned, but they want more options for who's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And can you say just a little more I've been this is one of those issues that I really 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 want something to happen with accreditation to break the hold that KCREP has, and that could look like deregulation, or that could look like increasing uh, uh, what's the word when businesses compete against each other?
More competition.
More competition. I think both of those things would be awesome. Um, did, but is so, Deborah? That's what's going on. That there's they're that they're trying to open it up so that more organizations have access to the accreditation process, so that uh, so that there could be a greater number of accreditors, I guess.
Well, it's twofold. So one is, working with the Secretary of Education, the Attorney General, and then actually HHS in the case of medical school. And they specifically talked about law school and medical school as very specific problems. They didn't get to every type of, they didn't mention education schools, which surprised me. So one is stopping anything that is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So like sort of DEI related sorts of things. So that's one part of it. And I imagine there's just going to be more monitoring and that sort of thing. Like, what are these people up to? Are they getting any good results? People are going to all be audited for what sort of outcomes they're getting. And the second prong of it is the promoting competition. They wanted to have some sort of center or something that's going to accelerate innovation and accountability. So it's both. It's like, let's fix what's there.
Mm-hmm.
At least make them stop doing things that we think are illegal
Mm-hmm.
and are discriminatory, and let's open it up for if there's some other bodies that want to create themselves. Let's see, let's have at it. Let's have let's have some competition here.
I,
Mm.
I'd like to say why I think that is a good idea, and the I might have mentioned this last week, but I think one of the things that accreditation does that is bad relates to something that Thomas Sowell said, which I think was brilliant. And one of the things that Thomas Sowell has said that I think is brilliant, uh, he said that academics, one of the problems with academia is that academics pay no price for being wrong. And on the one hand, you could say, well, being wrong some of the time is going to be a natural part of the process of inquiry and exploration. And so it's important to protect a system that allows people to be wrong from time to time. Um, I think what has happened though is that accreditation and even tenure, which yeah, I don't think tenure is what it used to be, but I saw something in the Wall Street Journal today suggesting that tenure was a bad idea, and I think I generally agree at this point. Um, but I think what accreditation does is when they reify progressive ideology in accreditation standards, it keeps it puts ideas that should be allowed to die because they are bad or dysfunctional. It essentially puts them on artificial respiration. It
Mm.
artificially perpetuates and supports ideas that could never survive in a marketplace of ideas because um, it says you must buy these ideas. You must continue to ensure that these ideas remain as part of a curriculum, even if they're terrible. And so that process needs to stop. Like ideas do need to be able to uh, survive on their merit. And if they can't, or if they're unlikely to, then they need not to be supported artificially. And I think that accreditation plays a part in artificially supporting terrible ideas that, most sixth graders would be able to say, no, that's awful. If you were to put this, if you were to take ideas like that are couched in nice sounding terms like DEI and anti racism and take away the buzzwords and ask your average child if it's a good idea to treat people differently because of who they are. Uh, Most children are going to say, no, that's a terrible idea. But people with PhDs have lost the ability to do that because they've they've created this system that where ideas are insulated carefully,
Well,
and
and when you think about
accreditation
like, it might be
do
worth
that.
looking at what the purpose is of accreditation and credentialism in general, which is just to anchor and ground one one way of doing this, and say this is the way it we have decided as a profession or as a guild or as a state or whatever, that this is the way we want this to be done, that we're going to certify this and say if it's done in this way, then it's the right way. And
Well, it also places guardrails, though. So it says, and if you do this, then
then you're
you
not
are,
doing it.
well, not only are you not doing it, but that you might be breaking a law. And so it
Right.
provides some degree, like I'm very cautious about the idea of accountability because it's been misused by the woke. But
Yeah.
if if someone is decides that it's a really great idea to have sex with their patients, and that's part of the service that they offer or something, then there has to be like there has to be
Well, have you
somebody who
seen
says that's
sex
not okay.
therapists who actually do that? I mean, there's that is a thing. Like, there's actual like the HBO used to have whole shows on that. You know,
Well,
I mean,
no, I
maybe they're not
haven't heard of
credentialed,
that.
but they're out there making money, and
Well, yeah, I
so
mean,
I guess
so I think people need to be protected from
I
that.
guess I wonder like is it really worthwhile to have a whole system of licensure. Like, think about for counselors all of the money that goes into just obtaining your license,
Mm-hmm.
and the hours of supervision, and the lengthy time it takes to get that, and then look at outcomes of modern therapy. Like, are we doing better because we spend a whole lot of money and we have a bunch of people who are collecting fees and payments off of the people who want the license? Has the industry improved because we have this? Like, here's another example that's not counseling. I saw this a few years ago. I worked in a naturopathic clinic for 6 years, and one of my colleagues was a lactation consultant. And I had left law school with the plan to go back to graduate school and get a counseling degree and get a counseling license, but I wasn't set up to where I could go to graduate school yet, because I had to work in order to support help support my family, and I needed to get myself to a certain position in that before I could take the time off of work to go back to school. So here I am in this like purgatory between professional programs. And I briefly thought, oh, lactation consulting, that's really good. And that's a positive way that you can impact families and children and mothers. And am I interested in that? I mean, I had 4 kids, spent plenty of years breastfeeding, and thought just very briefly about that. And then I looked into what it would take. Used to be, when my girls were little and I called the La Leche League, you could have somebody who was just basically like a volunteer, or sometimes people had jobs doing it, but it was a very it was mostly self taught and community taught work that you were doing. By the time we're talking about like 2017, 2018, there's the IBCLC, which is the International Baccalaureate of something. What was it? It's a board of accredited lactation consultants. Somebody knows what it stands for, I'm sure. And it is basically a PhD. It's basically
What? Seriously?
I'm not even kidding. It's like
Wow.
it's like a nurse practitioner, which is the same length of time that it takes to get a PhD. It is
Good
a
Lord.
massive, massive thing where you have to have thousands of hours of working under somebody, where you're paying them. You're their intern and you're
Wow.
paying them to get your hours. So it's this insane like degree inflation that's happened here. And I think a lot of what credentialing does is it pads degree planning programs. It gives people a job for supervising. It puts people in school for a lot longer. It's basically a Ponzi scheme with educational, the academic institutions and educational providers laughing all the way to the bank, while services are not getting any better. And you can still get like terrible woke psychologists and counselors, regardless of the money that they've spent getting credentialed.
I mean,
Well, I think,
that's hard to argue against.
yeah, and I think what's interesting, and maybe this is part of it, I don't know, but only about 35%, this is in California, 35% of people who enter a marriage and family therapy graduate program, 35% will actually get licensed. So you think about the 65%, very low. And why is that? Because of all of the regulations and the hoops you have to jump through to get the hours, to get the right kind of supervision, to get the right everything, et cetera, et cetera. And people either can't afford to do that, or they end up giving up, because most of those entry level like traineeships and internships are like working with populations that are very challenging to work with. And so people end up throwing in the towel and have spent X amount of dollars for something that they're not going to use, at least not in the classic sense of what it's meant to be. So there is a Ponzi money scheme, I think, running behind this. I do agree with that. And I also see the importance of having some type of a guardrail, or some type of a, of a sense of containment around these professions so they don't run buck wild. I mean, where we are with accreditation, the DEI being a part, or the DEI component being ruled, illegal essentially for accreditation, bodies to use as part of their curriculum requirements, that would have made a very big difference in my ability to teach. That would have actually
Yeah.
made a huge difference because
Right.
even if the school was saying, well, we still want this DEI, I could have said, yeah, but you're under a bigger conglomerate, which tells me I don't
Right.
have to. I could have fought the system in a
Mhm.
sense, and I might have
Yeah.
been able to make some progress that way.
Yeah, it's too
So
bad
those are
this
my
didn't
thoughts.
happen. It's too bad this didn't happen earlier when you were still teaching, so that you would have had, it basically would have given you something to, stand
Hmm.
behind, that's in
Sure.
defense of you not having to teach this. But everybody was essentially just thrown to the wolves and told that they had to do
Yes.
this, even if they
Well,
had ethical
Yes.
arguments against it. But I agree, I do see the value of licensing, because I mean, this is sort of why I'm not a libertarian, even though I have some libertarian, what could be categorized as libertarian views, because I don't just trust that everybody, if left to their own devices, will do the right thing. People
right.
absolutely will exploit one another. There's a subset of the population that will do absolutely anything they can get away with.
Yes.
And so I think we do need some guardrails, um, for the profession. So, in the event of extremes, like a therapist that sleeps with clients, or a therapist that
Hmm.
dispenses drugs to clients, without the proper training. Because that's something that has also happened. I do think we need something that kind of protects the consumer.
You
But
know,
one is about like there's I think there's two issues that we're discussing. One is about a profession being able to police itself. The other
Hmm.
is about what should constitute, the reasonable standards that would um, differentiate a layperson from a practitioner.
Hmm.
you know what? Can I make an argument here? I would
Please.
I'm totally in favor of certificate certification. I think that having a practitioner of whatever it is that you're seeking. Let's just use counseling for an example. If you know that your counselor or your coach went to such and such training program, they can carry the letters that correspond to that training program, and you kind of know, okay, he or she was educated according to these philosophies, and I like these philosophies, so I'm going to go with that. Once you get to the level of licensure, now the government's involved, and basically this is when this service gets sold to you as an expert provider. And that's one of the problems that I see in the modern counseling profession. Counselors are not expert providers. These are helping professionals who can offer a lot of guidance and a lot of help examining oneself. But if you start to elevate them to the level of the expert, I think that you get a lot of problems when you do that. And I think that is one of my issues with the medicalization of the counseling field, is that, and frankly, I think that our medical field suffers from the same thing. Our doctor should be a consultant that we see when we are experiencing problems with our physical body, and we want to go to somebody who knows more about this than we do. But we should be consulting them and not seeing them as somebody who we hand over our authority to. I
Would you
believe that
would you
it's,
would could the
yeah.
could the same argument be made for say an electrician? I'm wondering if because I wonder, would it be better when it comes to education? And I'm concerned mostly with the politicization of psychotherapy. So this is where
Mhm.
my thoughts come from. Would it be better to treat it more like and would it address your concern, Leslie, or your ideas? If psychotherapy was not something that you necessarily went to graduate school in order to learn to do, but it was much more like an apprenticeship where there was some schooling involved, but the vast majority of it would involve uh,
Mm.
the actual work. And
I
then
think,
at the end
yeah,
of that, you become, yeah, I don't know, there's like different levels of electrician to show how experienced you are. I
maybe,
mean,
but I wouldn't
or
like
would
to
that
see
be
that governed by the state anyway. I wouldn't want to see the state
Hmm.
involved in that. I think that anytime you get your government involved and regulating the people's lives, there there's a now you have another incentive set that's
Hmm.
that's been integrated into that process. Now you have something else that is going to use its own motives and its own needs in order to influence the thing that's happening here.
Hmm.
And I'm really suspicious of that. I do think
Hmm.
that, like in the case of the therapist sleeping with their client, what's the percentage of therapists who've lost their license who've done so because they've slept with their client? It's pretty high. It's a big problem.
Mhm.
It's a huge problem. So I don't see that we've really been protected from that. What we have is now somebody can sue, maybe, or whatever. But we could also change. Here's another idea, just totally out of left field, but we could change the rules around, we could tighten up our rules around prostitution and make it illegal for anybody to buy and sell the act of sex in any way. I mean, this is something I'd be totally in favor of. No surrogacy, no no getting an egg donor. The act of physical sex is off limits for commerce. And so if you have sex with your client in the midst of some other service that you're providing, and they can make a case that you coerced them or something like that, then you've got another protection under the law, and you don't need the license to hang over their head. If you've been coerced into sex, maybe there's another way to protect somebody from that. Or maybe we just stop babying people and say, if you got yourself into that situation, maybe that's a learning lesson that you needed, and maybe you Yelp the guy so that everybody knows he does this and his reputation suffers. I don't know. But there are other ways to talk about even that happening. I don't think that the current system protects us as well. It's kind of like the TSA. It's this big show of we're really protecting you, but at the end of the day, what it is a money making scheme that leaves people pretty much in the same position that they were in before, except with more bells and whistles and a lot of smoke and mirrors,
Taxes.
really.
Yeah.
Taxes, yeah.
I mean, do we know? I mean, I like some of your arguments, Leslie. I am wondering, I'd love to see data on like any of these things, like when there was some licensing, when there wasn't. I don't think we really have that data though, right? And then outcomes, and then know whether there really was a difference or not. I see what you're talking about, the possibility for rent seeking and just making huge amounts of money for nobody's benefit except the people that are taking the fees, right? Like, so I get that. I do like the guardrail piece a little bit. I hear what you're also saying though about like self responsibility and not having like people out like protecting you all the time. I do come back to just with institutions of any sort. Like at the end of the day, it does help sometimes because we can't necessarily process like every single thing and every bit of information. Sometimes when there's a place where you feel like some things are pre-vetted somehow, and you sort of if you actually trust the institution that's somehow either having licensing or something, it's like it's a little easier for the person navigating their life with every decision that they have to make, that there was something was a little checked out first so they didn't have to do it all themselves. So that's sometimes when I think about having some sort of institution or whether it's accreditation or something that's sort of some pre-vetting for people to simplify all the information they have to wade through.
So that I guess so that the general public could have some, when they see a licensed or credentialed professional, a certain amount of work is done for them that they can, have some degree of confidence in
Mhm.
the professionalism of the person that they're getting ready to see. Where I come back to with this, and Leslie, your points are all well taken, and I think exploration of alternatives it is certainly an interesting conversation. But at the end of the day, what I come back to is the extraordinary disservice and breach of public trust that the profession of counseling is engaged in by not only encouraging but now requiring the politicization of the therapeutic alliance. It's a breach of public trust that I have difficulty finding words to express the enormity of what a blunder that was. And yeah, it makes it when a profession breaches its fidelity to the population in such an extraordinary and gross way, it makes it difficult to then argue for why, you know, accreditation and the idea of having a profession in the first place, it makes it hard to argue why that's a good idea. And especially when the profession of counseling, for example, breaches
Mm.
blatantly its own code of ethics, where it
Yeah.
says you do not, it says you don't impose your values or beliefs onto your patients. And then on the next page, it says, you
Mm-hmm.
know, it's perfectly okay to help your patients to understand that they're living in a world that consists of oppressors and oppressed.
Well,
And by the way,
Right.
it's also a really good idea to teach your patients to teach that to their friends and
yeah.
family members.
And one of the things I think that when
Yeah.
you codify something in law, like this code of, if you make an allow the accreditation and the code of ethics to be codified in law through your licensure process, you make a ship that's really hard to turn around when it starts to get
Mm.
corrupted like this. Instead of just losing all credibility, they still are the one way that you funnel people through. So you have a ton of people who are at the beginning of a career wanting to embark on a counseling career who look at this and they don't have options. They don't have viable options to find another path into helping people. They have to go through this system. And so they have to support this system through their funding it in order to come out the other end as a counselor. So you get a ship that's very hard to turn around. And somebody just was talking about, we were talking about sex with clients, and I just looked up real quick a couple of articles. There's one that's a bit dated, but it is a survey of, it doesn't say what the size was, but it says as many as 12% of male therapists and 3% of female therapists engaged in sexual intimacies with at least one patient. This is an older one
It's
again. And then
high,
another one
a high number.
that talks about that, where was it? It was like 7% of therapists were willing to admit that they'd had some kind of a sexual boundary violation with a client.
Wow.
So, you know,
It's
this is,
really high.
well, these are
It's really high.
human beings, right? And you're working
Hmm.
closely with a human being. This is a part that you can't legislate away from. It's going to take boundaries on the personal level and commitment on a personal level. And sure, that collegial supervision process really helps with that, because that's where you go to your colleagues and you say, this is an issue that I'm coming up with. How can I work with this? How can I get some support around this so that I maintain high ethical standards? That could, there are other ways to do this. You could do this through certification process that needs to be upkept, where part of the ability to say, I'm a such and such, I'm a kindsvatter certified therapist. So in order for me to tell you that I'm a kindsvatter, let's even say a kindsvatter Siefen friend therapist, and I practice according to the principles of this particular therapeutic philosophy. In order for me to maintain that and be able to continue to tell you that, I have some accountability to that certifying body, and I must do continuing education and supervision with that. There's ways to do this that remove it from that government grasp. So I'm not opposed to
Hmm.
gatekeeping. I'm not
Yeah.
opposed to credentialing. I'm just opposed to this forced credentialing. This is the lack of consent for the client as well as for the practitioner when the government is forcing it on you.
Hmm.
Well, there are states that do something that's kind of in between. So Vermont, so when you graduate, you know, with your master's degree in Vermont, you become what's called a rostered psychotherapist, and there are very few requirements to become a rostered psychotherapist. Like like anybody, whether they've been to school or not, can call themselves a rostered psychotherapist in Vermont. And uh, you are you're beholden legally to Vermont counseling law. So if someone were to have sex or otherwise exploit their patient, while being licensed as or while being rostered as a psychotherapist, then they're accountable to the law. And I think those kind of protections are important because somebody said earlier that, I mean, it comes down to the question of, do you think that people are basically good and that they sometimes misstep, or do you think that people are basically bad and are kept in line by social convention and law? And I don't know if I would place myself in one category or the other, but I do sort of think I'm sort of happy that in Florida, if someone who is licensed has sex with a patient, it's a second degree felony. And I
Hmm.
think that's a good idea.
Hmm.
I think that people who come to psychotherapy are incredibly vulnerable and predatory behavior, and these things, they rarely start with someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to, sleep with my patient," but allowing yourself to slip in out of a professional role and to act on libidinal instincts with a vulnerable person, in my mind, is on par with pedophilia. Like
Hmm.
it is a predatory thing, even though it might begin with sort of like warm feelings of connection and so forth.
You know,
So, so
Aaron,
I,
I think it's so interesting. I'm actually really pleased that we're having a discussion where I disagree completely with what somebody is saying, because you so often we're all on the same page. I disagree that that should be a felony, and and I do agree that that person, if they do something that breaches their own ethical standards so extremely, that they should absolutely be barred from being able to claim that they're a member of that profession ever again. Maybe there could be some kind of civil penalty, but I don't agree that it should be a felony. And the primary reason for that is I think that as people, we have placed too much responsibility in the hands of other people for our own well being. And I disagree with the authority complex that we've established for doctors, for therapists, and for other people who belong to certain professions. I don't think that as individuals we should ever look to another person that we are buying time from as an authority over our own life. And to set up something where it's a felony for them to mislead you is to say that you are the small victimized person and that was the big bad predator. I think that if we just establish people are actually here, this is a consultant that you're buying some time with, that is going to engage with you, but you bear all the responsibility for what how you choose to interact with that consultant. I
well,
I think that that's a more appropriate way to do it.
here's where I have a problem with that, is that uh, let's change it from like an adult seeking psychotherapy to a child seeking psychotherapy. Like, are they still here?
No,
You
because
know, are
there
they?
are other laws for that. I mean, that's kind of like the
Well,
argument about hate crime, right?
right.
Uh-huh.
But let me. But we don't view we view children as being vulnerable and not able to sort of, make their own decisions, and so we have a lot of laws protecting children and so forth. I think and I don't mean to compare people who seek psychotherapy, uh, to compare them to children. Obviously, I'm using this to make a point, though, that people who seek psychotherapy a lot of times have compromised egos. Like, they have a compromised sense of self, and they're not maybe in a great position to be to be making like measured decisions about regulating their relationship with a professional. They're trusting the professional to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
I would
And
say that that is probably the case for a lot of therapists as well. I mean, people are people, and people kind of are this mishmash of states. And I know a lot of therapists that I could say that about as well. You know, not pejoratively, just that
right.
people go through their own processes, and maybe we seek support more when we're needing support more. I don't think that it's ever okay for someone to exploit that. I just disagree with the full weight of the state being thrown at that, in that, because that underscores that authority balance that I think is perpetuated by our imagining it. And if we can help people to see that they actually have agency, and that the individual is responsible for the individual's behavior and for their own discernment, I think that that's just kind of my
Wait a second though.
okay.
But then why would you, so this, I mean, this is like really interesting, your views and Aaron's views on this, but then you mentioned earlier as a possible solution, really, coming down on the commodification of sex. So if you don't want government interference in therapy, why would you want government interference in an arrangement between two individuals? Like maybe somebody wants to, maybe a female wants to commodify sex because her sexuality is one of the most powerful things she has, and women take all the financial and physical and social risks when they have sex, in terms of pregnancy, in terms of yeast infections, in terms of bladder infections, UTIs, all the lovely fun stuff. Maybe somebody feels like, hey, I should get paid for this. So why would you want the full weight of the state on that then?
Well, my answer to that is probably based on something that I never would have thought that I fall into, but it's probably a social philosophy that's a little bit conservative, which is, again, that's a weird word for me to use for myself. But I just see sex as something separate from other areas of human business and relationship. I think sex has a fundamental sacred and spiritual component that when we start to commodify that, the end result is what we're seeing, like with the surrogacy debate, where children are being bought and sold. Surrogacy is just another form of prostitution. Prostitution is exploitation of male sexuality through the exploitation of female sexuality. And when you start to lose your grasp on that, you lose the core of a functioning society, which is family and sacred connection
Yeah.
between people. So I don't see those as equivalents. I see it differently. I see sex as being in its life. So can we say as a culture that we value life in some important way, that we set it aside from other things that people can sell with their labor or with their time? I would say so. I would also say, just to address the children question, therapists with children here. I'm sorry, you guys, you're getting like such an earful of my opinions right now, but the
It's fascinating, Leslie. A real
maybe,
pleasure.
but I don't believe in therapy for children, and that's something
Yeah,
that
well, there you go. Yeah,
I feel very strongly about that, and
yeah.
outside of extreme situations where there's maybe the loss of the parents or something like that, the
Or the
child is
parents are just
really,
completely unavailable because of
I
drugs or something like
I
that.
just don't believe in one-on-one therapy for children.
Yeah.
Maybe I could make that case across the board that there should always be a loving caregiver who's actually in that person's life, in that child's life, in an ongoing and consistent way, present whenever a child meets with a therapist. Because I don't believe that a one-on-one meeting with a therapist is appropriate. Period. Full
That's
stop with
uh,
little kids.
I agree with you on that one. I really do, and I might even extend that into most adolescents. That that the presence of a caregiver is
Well,
so
a lot of
important.
the reason that kids end up in therapy is because there are issues with the adults in their lives. So it's not as effective
Right,
if it's a 1 hour, once a week
right,
session that you're having with the child or an adolescent, and nothing is changing at home or nothing's changing in other contexts in that child's life. It's not going to be very effective anyhow. That's one of the big issues I've had with children and adolescent therapy, is that if you don't have a good caretaker involved in the process, nothing really
hmm,
happens for that kid. I mean,
right.
there's a core issue happening somewhere else in the life of that child that's not being addressed.
Mm.
I don't know, man. My therapist when I was a teenager saved my life, and
Really?
if you think
Wow.
that that therapist would have been able to get through to my mother. You have another thing coming.
Wow.
Ain't nothing gonna touch that.
How old
Wow.
were you when you started seeing the therapist, Jen?
It was like 17.
Yeah, see, I'd
Wow.
be fine with that.
He was he
I'd be
was
totally
That's
fine.
too
I'm
much.
talking about
completely he
like
was
12 and
amazing.
under is when I would say that the kid has that you're even a very good therapist working with a kid who's 12 and under a lot of times can inadvertently wedge themselves between the values of the home and the values that are explored in the therapy session, and that's probably a very blunt and sloppy shorthand way of saying what I'm trying to say, but I think that for little kids it's really dangerous. But a 17-year-old, I think that's fantastic because you're actually moving on your way to having some agency in your own life.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good age.
Hmm. Wow, my goodness.
What an interesting
What an
conversation.
interesting morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, you guys, before we wrap up?
Well,
I have a dark thought that I'll share on this sunny day. When you were talking about the prostitution being exploitation of male sexuality through exploitation of female sexuality, I started thinking about all the ways in which people are exploited within their marriages. And granted, that's a personal arrangement and it's all legal. But when you've
Hmm.
got something like where you've got a woman who's working a high powered, super intense job with tons of hours, and she's using her body to give life and all of the strain to her health that comes with that. Not that it's a negative thing, it's a great thing. But then at home, she's still doing 75% of all the housework, 75% of making all the arrangements for everything that happens in the family unit, and 75% of the childcare. She is being exploited. And there's also situations in which men are being exploited. So I don't think we have a surefire way of getting ourselves out of, you know, being exploited.
I think you're
My
right.
final thoughts are
I don't think marriage is the panacea. I've seen people just
I
get
agree with that.
devoured in it.
I totally agree with that. I've had this very same argument with other people in different contexts. So I'm totally with you. Those are I guess if I was going to give some final thoughts, I'd like to close with what Jen just said, because I've had those very same conversations with people about marriage not being a protector against exploitation. So I'm with you 100% on that.
Is there any way for anybody to ever complete for anything to be a complete protection against exploitation? Because I think people
No,
exploit each other all
No.
the time in all
no.
kinds of
Yes,
ways.
Yeah.
all the
I
time,
think
every day, all the time.
I just think it comes down to, Leslie, what you've been arguing for, and that's the place where it's not perfect either, but like more personal agency, and I guess our question is like, are there people who don't have it? Should we protect them, or should they develop it and like learn the hard way? Like, I don't know,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do agree with what you're saying, Jen. I think that that's a really good point. It's fodder for a much longer and richer discussion about just that.
Yes.
I think that would be
Yes.
Yeah.
great to do. I think
That
that
would be great.
it's to me the commercializing and the commodifying of sex and sexuality is just there's some things I believe we shouldn't be able to buy and sell, and human life is one of those. We shouldn't be able to pay someone to kill somebody, and we shouldn't be able to. I mean, there's life and death here, and when we're talking about sex, we're talking about life in so many ways. So that's just perhaps I could continue to try to develop that argument in a way that'll make sense better, and see if I can reach something that sounds more rational instead of spiritual. But that's where I'm at right now with that. Aaron, do
Well,
you have any final thoughts?
only that I think you've been extremely clear about what your thoughts are, and it's been a fascinating, challenging in the very best sense of the word conversation.
Yeah, thanks for disagreeing with me.
Yeah,
I
no
I
problem.
love
I'll disagree with
disagreement.
you any day of the week, girl.
I know you will, Jennifer. All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Bye.